Hi. Okay, this is lecture number 19, Jesus Christ. Greetings in the name of God and Jesus Christ. Blessed are you, my friends. Blessed is this hour, my dear friends. To most of you, I have talked now for a few months, and I have not mentioned as yet Jesus Christ, who he is and what he has done. At this time of year, when you are celebrating the birth of Christ, I will choose this subject as an appropriate one. Or I guess it's Easter, so we should call this the resurrection of Christ. So it is not only on this earthly sphere, but in the spiritual worlds as well, that the light of Christ is spreading. And you may say, but in the spiritual world there is no time, and this is true. Yet as difficult as this is to explain to you about this period, only drawn out much longer than on earth, every year, according to your human year, after a certain regular period, let us say, this light of Christ is coming up with renewed force in remembrance of the greatest deed that has ever been accomplished. This light is so strong and so penetrating and so glorious that you have no possible way to imagine. There is such bliss, such rejoicing, such happiness, and such wisdom coming from this light. For wisdom and light are one, and you say it in your human language, enlightenment. In the spiritual world, light and knowledge and light and love are one and the same things. And this light at this period penetrates down to the deepest spheres of gloom, at least to some small degree, in the worlds of darkness. There may be just a gleam of it, just a sheen, but a glimpse of light. Yet there is this influx, and at this period, when these beings living in the world of darkness encounter this light, the reaction is different. Those who are ready to advance spiritually will welcome this light. They will follow it. And others who are not that far yet will cringe away from it in extreme pain, for it is very painful for them, a pain they cannot stand. And therefore, a human being who has succeeded to bring out this light within, for it is one and the same light, will be protected against creatures of the world of darkness. Now, who is Christ? There are some Christian religions who claim that he is God. This is not so. For he himself has said, as you can find out from the Holy Scriptures, that he is not God. He is not the Father, the Creator. And there are some who say Jesus was just a wise man, like a few others in history. There are some who say that Jesus was just a wise man, like a few others history has known, a sage, a great teacher, with great wisdom. But he is not more than a few others who have lived at other times in other countries. This is wrong too. I'm telling you truth, my friends, whether you want to believe it now or not. Jesus, the man, was the incarnation of the Christ. And this spirit is the highest, most exalted of all created beings. He is the first direct and inborn creation of God. His substance is the same as the substance of God. And all of you have some of this substance, that which I call the higher self, or the divine spark, that which has to come out through spiritual development gradually. But no other created being has this substance to quite the same degree as Christ. And there is a difference. And I can see again and again that human beings think or feel, why he? If he is the Son of God, so are we the sons of God. Why should he be better, or more exalted, or higher? Why? This is not just. So these thoughts and feelings are often lurking in the soul of man, even if he does not dare to make the thoughts conscious. And in this very same thought lies the germ of the fall of the angels. And this very thought, this very attitude started once long ago, before the material earth existed, and caused the coming into existence of disharmony and of evil. Certainly, none who had ever thought so realized at the time the danger of such an attitude, or realized what lay in it. Realized that in this, let us call it jealousy, actually lies a lack of faith in God, in the capacity of his love. For even though God created in his first Son the highest of all beings, and gave most of his substance to him, if you will have the trust and the faith the Creator deserves, you will not think that this is unjust, or that you will lack anything. Oh, Nowadays, people do not go so far in thinking through these thoughts, but that slight feeling of resistance against Christ in a number of people represents the germ of the fall, the germ of evil, and this is the way it all started. In what way has Jesus Christ saved mankind? In what way has Jesus Christ saved mankind? In what way was his deed the greatest? And what was the purpose of his life on earth, of his one-time incarnation? The purpose of his life was not only to spread his teachings, true and beautiful as these teachings are, they could be found elsewhere too. Perhaps in another form, nevertheless basically the same. So this was certainly not the only purpose. The second purpose of his life, and still not the main and most important one, was through his life and death, he showed symbolically what the course of development or the stages, he showed symbolically what the course of development or the stages of same should be for man, for each and every one who wants to regain the kingdom of heaven. Testing, trials, remaining faithful to God in times of adversity, the crucifixion of the ego, of the personal ego with all its vanity and self-will, this was symbolized by the body of Jesus Christ. And the resurrection of his spirit signifies the life eternal of bliss and happiness of the spiritual being of each individual after the ego has been crucified. That is such a big sentence that I'm going to say it again. He showed symbolically what the course of development, or the stages of same, should be for man, for each and every one who wants to regain the kingdom of heaven. Testing, trials, remaining faithful to God in times of adversity, the crucifixion of the ego, of the personal ego with all its vanity and self-will. This was symbolized by the body of Jesus, and the resurrection of his spirit signifies the life eternal of bliss and happiness of the spiritual being of each individual after the ego has been crucified. This cannot happen otherwise than through pain. But even this part of his task is, as I said, not the main and most important one. The two mentioned here can be considered as bylines or accompanying purposes to the main purpose he had to fulfill. I will at the future time go into greater detail in what way his main task meant salvation. For he was the Messiah. But I want to say only this to you now. If he should have failed, another spirit would have tried it, for it was not absolutely certain beforehand that he would fulfill the task. But he was the natural choice, the logical conclusion, if I may say so. Someone had to come to earth and go through all the sufferings completely alone at certain times, bare of all divine protection, and resist all evil, all temptation, out of his own free will. For in this way alone could the spiritual laws continue unbrokenly, so that in justice towards the very forces of evil, each individual can find its way back to God. God is the power, and with this power he could certainly have done anything, also breaking his own laws. But that would have meant that a great number of creatures who were then not ready to find their way back at the period such a decision would have been made by God, would have been permanently separated from God, and eternal life of bliss. I'm going to read that again because I think I butchered it. God is the power, and with this power he could certainly have done anything, also breaking his own laws. But that would have meant that a great number of creatures who were then not ready to find their way back at that period, such a decision would have been made by God, would have permanently separated from God and eternal life. And that might have included any one of you. I get that. Only by the vast and elaborate plan of salvation is it possible that all to the very last of the fallen creatures can at one time find their way back to God. And this is difficult to understand for you now with these few words, but I am giving you presently, but I promise in the future I will go into more detail about all of this. But this should suffice for the present to give you an idea of how extremely grave and serious the task was. For only in this manner will no one ever be able to say God is not just or the greatest. No one will be able to say that God has used this power to violate his gift of free will to each and every individual. and this could only have happened through the fulfillment of such a task. For thus no free will was broken, no power used unduly, and Jesus Christ has proven this utterly. The natural question may come up: can we find and reach God? Can we attain perfection only through Jesus Christ? And the answer is yes and no, my friends. It is one of those apparently paradoxical cases where both answers are correct. And I will try to explain how I mean this. You can reach a stage of development through every one of the great religions, also the non-Christian ones, in which you can experience absolute truth. And no spirit of the world of God will ever tell you to leave your church or temple or your faith. For if you have found what you need in happiness, in spiritual food, in the faith you are accustomed to, remain there. Enough of basic fundamental truth, enough of what you need for your spiritual development is contained. And as I said in all the great religions, and it is only up to you to find out what these truths are that you need for your personal development and to put it into practice. And when I speak of satisfaction of your faith, I do not mean that it satisfies your surface conscience. That is not enough. It has to satisfy your spirit, your higher self. And this higher self is very demanding. But if you follow the teachings of your religion, whereby you learn and do the one thing that really matters, self-knowledge, and self-purification, utter self-honesty, without this, no purification is possible, then the religion into which you belong or which you have chosen will satisfy your spirit. This purification, this crucifixion of your lower self, is the one and all important thing that matters. And wherever you find the necessary help, guidance, and inspiration to accomplish this, no matter so much, even if you, for manifold reasons, do not recognize Christ in a religious affiliation, by self-purification alone, you will raise your consciousness to such a degree that you will be open for truth in all its aspects concerning the part Christ played in the history of creation, or anything else for that matter. So in this respect, the answer is no. To the question whether it is a condition that you have to recognize Jesus Christ right now and can only reach God through him. The perception of absolute truth regarding any question can, in other words, only happen through such a process of self-purification. And alas, few people are doing this, whether recognition of some factors still comes during life or afterwards. Anyone going through this process of self-purification, difficult as it is, will prepare the ground to be able to receive and experience absolute truth in all its facets. Whether some of this still takes place during the incarnation or due to certain circumstances afterwards. But the ground has to be prepared, and this means perfection through purification. And as long as there is, for instance, a certain stubbornness in the soul regarding anything, not only this subject, absolute truth or experiences and perception of it is impossible. For this stubbornness and self-will is exactly that which hinders you to raise your consciousness, as each imperfection is a pure truth concerning anything in connection with the creation and the divine. And the fact that Christ is the Messiah, that Christ is the most exalted of all created beings, is a very important part of the great truth and of history of creation, or of the facts as they really and truly are, whether you are able and willing to recognize them or not. But that does not mean, my friend, that you should pray to Christ. No, only God, the Creator, should be prayed to. But what God expects from you, and what is part of perfection and development, at least from a certain degree on, is gratefulness to the person without whose deed no one could come back into divine light, without whose deed the stream back to God would have been broken for all creatures, not ready at the time such a decision would have been taken by God. Did I read that right? I'll read it again. But that does not mean, my friend, that you should pray to Christ. No, only God, the Creator, should be prayed to. But what God expects from you, and what is part of perfection and development, at least from a certain degree on, is gratefulness to the person without whose deed no one could have come back into divine light, without whose deed the stream back to God would have been broken for all creatures, not ready at the time such a decision would have been taken by God. So at some point, the time will come, even if some of you are not ready for it as yet, even if there are still other things to accomplish, which, as I said, can be done in any religion, or no organized religion for that matter, when this gratefulness for the greatest deed, without which you would be lost, will pervade you. You will be given to the one to whom it is due. And that is God's will. You should not disregard Christ so busily. You should think about all this, even if you do not recognize officially the Christian religion. As all religions have enough truth contained to enable your purification, by the same token, in all religions are also errors. So it is important for you only to follow that which your spirit demands, which your higher self is longing for. The rest will come by itself. But that does not change the fact that you should open your hearts and not completely put the one person aside to whom you owe most next to God. I hope you have understood me. I hope you do not interpret these words differently than exactly what I have said. There need never have been a split between Judaism and Christianity. There was never meant by God, and that was never meant by God or by the spirit world. And if this has happened, it is the fault of man. You have made these names and labels to which you attach a special implication. For us, Judaism, Christianity, and this and that do not mean anything. When Christ was born as Jesus at that particular time among these particular people, it had its good reasons. It was meant that one and the same should expand, should grow, and there should never have been this splitting. Splitting is chaos. Splitting is the nature of the fall of the angels, or the result of it, with all its miseries and hatred. Splitting is the separation from God, and this initial tragedy, this taking place long before the earth existed, is repeating itself again and again and again in the course of time until this disease will at the one time be cured forever. Union with God, the aim and the goal, is the contrary of splitting and separation. And if this splitting between Judaism and Christianity occurred after the life of Jesus, it is again the fault grown out of the same bad root of the initial splitting of man. There should have been a oneness between Judaism and Christianity, no matter what you call it, oneness, one wholeness, one completion. Therefore, since Christ represents such an important part of your returning to God, thus deserves your personal gratefulness, some contact with him, for he is indeed the best friend you could ever have, your strongest helper, you will not be able to reach God without him in the very last analysis. So in this respect, the answer to the question whether you can reach God only through him is yes. For the constant denying of this fact would simply imply a stubbornness of your heart that is a symptom of imperfection. And as long as any imperfection is alive within you, you cannot unite with God. And now, my friends, I want to say to each one of you, truly, no matter what religion you belong to, open your hearts and minds. Be broad-minded. Do not leave the faith you are accustomed to, as I have said. That is not necessary unless you feel like it. But consider that what I have said to you may be true even if you do not believe in that this is a spirit who talks to you, a spirit of the spirit world who has the knowledge and the insight that these are facts, not mere opinions, as most of you here have still some of these doubts. Consider it may be that way after all, and that what your fathers and forefathers or the people you trust in who influenced you in your life have said may not be entirely right. Certainly, they have some truth, as truth exists everywhere, but no one group among mankind has all the truth. And you, as a spiritually searching person, open the doors for truth, no matter from what side it may present itself to you. Do not hold on in stubbornness. Do not believe that this means to give in, or that it may mean to show lack of character, my friends. What an immature notion this is. This is not the question here at all. The question remains always, what is true? For God is truth, as well as wisdom and love. And if you deny truth for any silly, stubborn, and childish notion, you thus deny God, and at least in one aspect of your personality. And this is the only question that counts. Nothing else ever does, and can only be part of man's lower self, even if clothed with apparent high-sounding motives and codings. And now, my friends, I want to bring to some of you messages. This is a little different. However, I will not point out names or persons to whom the messages are directed. There are many good reasons why I'm not doing so, but if you listen carefully, also with your soul, you to whom its message is addressed, you alone will know this regards me. And perhaps some parts of this message may at first be a little confusing, but if you search carefully within yourself, and this should do, because you may need just that, you will find out after a while that it makes sense after all. Okay, so the guide then proceeds to address people in the lecture hall when Eva Parekos first originally channeled this work. This is lecture number 19. A group would gather when she channeled the guide. And the guide is addressing these individuals. So I'm going to go to one question. Let me see. I'm going to go down to it. Is lack of imagination considered a lack of character in the spiritual world? And what can one do to try to overcome it? It depends. Answer. So that was the question. Answer. It depends very much on what way this lack of imagination manifests itself. From the spiritual point of view, perfection includes, of course, also imagination. You can train imagination too. You can train anything. So if you're really interested enough in putting yourself in the place of another, you meditate about it, asking God for the insight and full understanding as much as possible for you. And if you keep on doing this constantly, then your imagination for others will grow. But if it concerns just artistic imagination, not everyone must have it. For each person has a different task, a different talent. But a certain kind of imagination for your fellow creatures is a necessary byproduct of perfection and development. And therefore it should be trained. It should be trained. I'm not going to go. This is it. That was it. Happy Easter. I'll take my glasses off because I know I can't see my eyes. Happy Easter, everybody. Happy resurrection. Be good. Love.